Hey guys, today's video is going to be all about basic geometry concepts. So what I'd go ahead and do, maybe get a scrap piece of paper, write down these examples, and then if you have any questions, just feel free to message me. So the first thing we're going to be talking about are what we call points. You can think of a point as a dot, although technically a dot is so infinitely small that it actually doesn't take up any space. But because we have to draw something to represent that, we draw a circle or a filled in dot. Okay, and when we name points, we name them with capital letters. So I have 2 points drawn here. I have point A and point X, and we always name them by the capital letter that's next to it. So I could draw another point, maybe right here, and if I wanted to name that, I could call it point R. Okay, so whatever the letter is, that's how you name it. And points make up almost everything that we talk about in geometry. So points lead into our next vocabulary word, which is a segment. I've gone ahead and drawn one here. Basically, a segment is what you get when you connect 2 points. So when we look at this segment, we've got 2 endpoints, point G and point H. So if I wanted to name this, I would call it segment GH. And when you write your name of the segment, you put the 2 letters side by side, and then you put a little segment symbol above it. The order of the letters don't matter, so you could also write segment HG with the little symbol above it, and then that would be the way to name it. And we could measure segments. You could measure how long they are in inches, centimeters, things like that, and we use segments to also create other things. So you could think of a segment as like the top of the ceiling to the floor in the corner of a room. Okay, so it's just the edge where something would meet from one point to another. Okay. A line is kind of like a segment, except unlike a segment which stops at 2 points, a line goes on forever in both directions. So we still name it the same. The labels are just a little bit different. So a segment or a line is a segment that continues forever. So the one I have drawn here, I'm going to still use my 2 points to name my line. So I'm going to say it's line PL. And then instead of just drawing a bar on the top above it to name it, I'm going to draw a little bar with 2 arrows, and that tells you that it goes on forever in both directions. So in geometry, labels are really important because that's going to dictate if you're talking about something that stops or does not stop. You could also name this LP, and that would also be a line. So it doesn't matter the order as long as you've got both letters. The other thing I might add is that lines have infinitely many points on them. So even though I only have 2 points drawn on my line, technically there's other points here. So maybe there's another point outside of L or between P and L. There's infinitely many on there, but we only use 2 to name the line. Okay. The last one is what we call a ray. A ray is kind of a combination between a segment and a line. So in a ray, you have one endpoint and one side that goes on forever. So when I look at this example that I drew in, I have my endpoint is X. Notice B is just a second point on the ray. So when I name it, I'm going to start with my endpoint and then go to my second point. And then I'll put my little symbol for a ray right above it. So notice there's a dot and an arrow. Now, the one thing I will say about rays is that order matters when you name them. So all the other ones, the order doesn't matter, but a ray, it does. You always want the endpoint letter to come first and then the other letter to come second. Okay, so if I were to draw another ray up here, maybe I'll do it in red. So I could have my ray going this direction. And when I name this, I would name it as ray A X, because A is the endpoint and X is the second point on the line. Okay, so if you have any questions about segments, lines, and rays or points, make sure you message me, but hopefully those make a little bit of sense. Now, what we use these for is to create other items in geometry. So that's going to lead us into what we call an angle. An angle is made up of 2 rays that are connected at one point. So I'm going to go ahead and draw 2 rays. So here's one ray, and then here is another ray. And you've probably seen these before, but we've just drawn 2 rays. We connected them at one point, so maybe we call that point A. And on the top ray, we'd call that AC. So there's my first ray. Okay. And then the second ray that we made was AD. Okay, so that's this ray right here. And notice that the point where they connect, that's this point right here, that is called the vertex. So if you ever see in your lesson where they refer to the vertex of an angle, that's the middle point. That's the point where the two rays touch, okay? Now, when we're talking about angles, we're actually referring to a degree measure. So basically, it's like if I took ray AD, and I moved it up towards ray AC. So the angle that I'm referring to is actually this measurement in between the two rays. So the length of the rays doesn't matter. Okay, I don't care how long ray AC or AD is. What I'm measuring is this inside degree measure between the two rays. And those are measured in degrees. Okay, so that number that's going to be in there is going to be a degree. For example, you might give an angle measure that's 35 degrees or 90 degrees or 120 degrees, all different measures. And most of the time you're gonna have degrees from 0 degrees all the way to 180 degrees. That kind of just depends on the problem. An angle that is 180 degrees would be flat. So that would be if I drew one ray going this way, and then, so that could be from X to R, and then I could draw another ray going the other direction. Oops. And that could be ray XT. So from one angle to the other angle, excuse me, goes all the way to the other side. That's 180 degrees. And there are three kinds of angles that you may or may not have heard about before: an acute angle, okay, an obtuse angle, and a right angle. An acute angle is an angle that measures less than 90 degrees, okay? An obtuse angle is greater than 90 degrees. Whoops. And then lastly, a right angle is exactly 90 degrees. So in a 90-degree angle, it would look something like this. One ray, another ray. And normally they mark it with a little box if it's a right angle. Okay, so that's exactly 90 degrees. Whereas an acute angle would be something that would look like this. One angle, or one ray to another. So that's an acute angle. And then an obtuse angle would be one that's bigger. So that could be, here's one ray, here's the other. So notice that this angle measure here is past the 90-degree mark, so this would be obtuse. Okay, if you have any questions about those three kinds of angles or what they look like, let me know. Now, when we're working with angles, there's three ways, or technically two ways, that we're going to be focused on naming them. So if I draw an angle, so here's one ray, here's the other. When I am naming them, you can name them first by just what the vertex point is. So I would write the symbol for an angle and then R. Or you could also name it by its 3 points that make up the angle. So I could name this, angle TRC, or you could call it angle CRT. But notice when I use the 3 letters, I always put the vertex in the middle. So that's very important when you're naming an angle, that the vertex is always the middle letter. So when I'm talking about this angle R, I'm talking about the measurement from one ray to the other. Okay? And in this case, if I said to classify it, this would be considered an obtuse angle.